This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, and ideas from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Connect with us to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I'm your host, Jamie Wood. Our topic today, writing great creative briefs. Now, it is probably no surprise that this topic comes up a lot, and it does seem to be an area where a lot of media sales professionals do struggle. Here's some of the things they actually tell us.
The creative team just doesn't seem to get what I'm asking for. I dread this part of the process.
The production team just never seems excited or interested in working on my clients.
I feel like I include all the relevant information in my brief, but what I get back from the creative department is so different to what I requested.
I relayed everything the client wanted exactly as they prescribed, only to have them come back to me and say it's not approved when I share it.
The takeaway from that is don't beat yourself up too much over this. It is a common issue for even the most seasoned of media sales professional. Now, whether it is a piece of artwork, whether it is a video, a piece of audio, a logo, or an entire suite of creative assets for a client's campaign, getting really good at writing creative briefs is a skill that will pay dividends. You will drastically minimize the amount of time you waste going back and forth with feedback and revisions. Creative teams will love working with you as a consequence. They'll get excited when they see your name attached to a brief. You will produce a higher quality of work. And what that translates to, most importantly, is that the client's campaigns will work harder for them. Great creative drives results for advertisers. Now, probably off the record, even if it doesn't work immediately, the client who loves their own creative is going to be a lot more inclined to keep persisting with advertising during that initial nervous launch phase of a campaign. So our returning guest today, it is Julian Cole. He is a strategy consultant. He is an author of the Planning Dirty newsletter, which you should follow. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. He's also a new father, and he's just an all-round weapon who always brings the gold. Speaking of gold, if you want to find something that is going to annoy you and clutter up your LinkedIn feed, you should add me on LinkedIn. If you find me annoying to listen to, you're going to find me just as annoying on LinkedIn, but it's where you connect with me to give me topic ideas, to ask me questions, to connect with and to help guide the show. I also do, I'm not going to say daily, but let's say every other day, a little bit of a post around media sales, something of a tip, and I always appreciate getting some discussion and some debate going around that. So my profile is in the show notes too, or search Jamie Wood on LinkedIn. I should be very easy to find. And without any further spam, let's get into the episode.
The first five.
Julian, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back on. I feel like, is this third time that we've chatted together?
This is indeed, mate. You're a crowd favourite. I always see the downloads have a nice spike when I say that Julian Cole's joining. So great to have you back on. I hear your world's changed a bit in the last couple of months.
It has. I've just had a new baby girl, so my first child. So getting used to that. So this is actually my first. I've been off work. I've been on paternity leave. So this is my first kind of work thing that I'm doing since being back. So if I'm a bit rusty or a bit slow, you'll know why.
My son just turned 2 last weekend, and the fact that you've got time at this critical stage to do the podcast is greatly appreciated, mate. Your world becomes very small, and in a good way, but very busy with a newborn. So thanks for making the time. What is interesting though, whilst you've been maybe not working as much, following your LinkedIn, you've definitely been quite active on LinkedIn and also with the Planning Dirty newsletter. And I'd noticed that you've been doing a lot more content around really creative briefs over the last couple of months. Why is that, mate?
Firstly, why have I kept the business running? I guess I'm a sole business owner. I'm full-time on the strategy finishing school. The way that people find out about that is through the workshops that I run. So before I finished, I've got kind of a team that help with kind of the content and making sure it's published and putting it all out there. We kind of batched a lot of content up and have kind of kept that running since we've gone. So I've done that. Then the other question, I guess there's 2 parts to that question. Why am I focusing on creative briefs? I think the reason that I'm focusing on creative briefs is because there's just not a lot of training out there. And I think the content, when I do talk about creative briefing, it tends to resonate with a lot of people because no one's really taught how to write a creative brief. We're just kind of shoved into the situation of, hey, brief this agency or brief this graphic designer, but no one's ever taught us how to write a great one. And so I've taken what I've learnt over the 12 years of being a strategist and have condensed that down and tried to simplify what goes into a great creative brief.
Is it just that people haven't been trained, or are there some other reasons why people might not potentially feel like they're equipped to write great creative briefs?
I would say it's the training and the critique. Even creatives are never taught what a great creative brief looks like and a bad one. You kind of feel it out. I think having someone tell you and critique a creative brief is something that's rare in this industry. And so to give people that opportunity of saying, hey, this is what goes into a great creative brief and this is what doesn't, and this was what a good one looks like and what doesn't, and one that's kind of average, is something that's rare and just doesn't happen, but is so valuable to everyone who gets that opportunity to work with, either whether they've got a boss who does that or whether it's they're learning somewhere else. That is such a valuable skill and can save a lot of hours, especially when we think about creative reviews and creative feedback. We've all been there where you start with the best intentions and the client's like, hey, do whatever. We've got an unlimited budget and we just want to see great, innovative ideas. And then you go 5 rounds and realize, oh, you just wanted a social post for, National Rum Week or something. And the amount of creative expense. And if you think about the wasted hours of an agency, that can really add up. So having a tight creative brief can really solve a number of the fundamental issues that we have in marketing.
It's a really good setup for the main topic too, because I think the majority of people listening to this pod are going to be people who are like frontline media sales professionals that are really entrusted to take a client brief, if you will, a commercial brief from a client, and then bring that into an organization and then often translate that internally to people who work in the creative function. And where I think we can often see this thing go off the rails is, well, there's 2 areas I've observed over the years. One is a lot of people just kind of self-designate themselves as not being creative, and they immediately put barriers and limits on their own kind of thinking. And the other area is that people potentially just don't know what type of information is relevant or isn't relevant when they're briefing in a particular creative team. And I think there's definitely more, there's more causal factors, but there are definitely 2 areas there where you can really see some things go off track pretty quickly in terms of producing the best creative work. So let's set the topic up for today and dive in, man. I'm excited.
Media Sales Mastery.
Super basic one to start the question. What is the purpose of a creative brief, and how does it differ from a marketing brief or a media brief per se in your world?
Yep. So the creative brief is made for a creative team to create a creative output. I know that sounds really simple and basic, but the difference is between a marketing brief and a client brief. That is to brief in an agency or sometimes a media plan, and it can be a bit more broad. Where right now with a creative brief, where we're actually after the output specifically from the creative team, be that a TV ad or a billboard or social post, there'll be a creative output at the end. So if we get down to brass tacks of like, how does then that differ from a marketing brief? A marketing brief is often to kind of set the scene of what it looks at the problem from the business perspective. And so I often say a client brief, what you're looking for is you want a business problem, the business goal, the target audience, the budget and timing. That's what I expect from a client brief, right? Or you can call it marketing brief. And remember, like, nomenclature and how we talk differs between agencies. So the thing is one agency might call it a marketing brief or an activation brief or a client brief, but that's what the client is giving you. Now, when we turn that into a creative brief, we don't look at the problem from the business perspective. We actually look at the problem from the consumer's perspective. So we are more interested when we're looking at the creative brief. We want to know, what is the consumer problem we're solving? what is the consumer goal, where are they trying to get to, obviously who the target audience is, and then we want an insight that unlocks the consumer problem and gets us closer to the consumer goal. And then the single-minded proposition or the one statement that we're saying. So that is a creative brief. So it's always helpful if we go through an example with this. So a campaign that everyone's pretty familiar with is Snickers, you're not you when you're hungry. I worked at BBDO, and so I've kind of got the inside track on this because they kind of formulated it. But if you look at Snickers, the business problem that they had was that they were in the chocolate category, and the chocolate category was being the number one feature that people were bringing up was the taste of chocolate. It was kind of a competition around who could talk about who had the best tasting chocolate. Now, the problem for Snickers is they're never going to win that competition. So the problem was they were in a category that was defined by taste, and they were not the number one preference. So that was the business problem. Now, if we look at it from the consumer's perspective and who they said the audience was it wasn't, the fancy chocolatiers. What they realized is the chocolate bar was attracting younger men who were eating it. And they weren't eating it for the taste per se, but what they were eating it for was because it was filling. So Snickers bars has more nuts in it than any other chocolate bar of the big kind of popular chocolate bars. So what they realized was Snickers kind of satisfies your hunger. You're never going to win a category against saying it tastes better than everyone else, but you can say that it's more satisfying. You eat another chocolate bar or Milky Way, you're never going to feel full after that. But if you eat a Snickers, you feel full. So what they did is, the business problem was we're in a category that is defined by taste, and the winner, the best tasting bar, wins. So that was the business problem. That went into the client brief to the agency. Now, they knew their audience was younger men. So what BBDO did is they went and talked to young men and kind of worked out kind of what was the biggest problem for them. And what they discovered was as young guys, we never want to be away from the pack, where your group of friends, you never want to act out in front of your friends. And what they realized was when you were hungry, they were the moments when you were acting out, when you were hangry, like you're just not yourself. You're kind of irritable, or you've got a short fuse, or you're just not as good at football as you were when you were, if everyone relied on you as the striker or, the wide receiver, and now you're not as good as that, then that was letting you down. So what they identified was the problem was they wanted to make sure that guys didn't act out. And so you can see there, that's very different from the business problem, because the business problem is looking at it from the business perspective, which the business really cares about. Like Mars really cares for Snickers if you don't have enough, if you're, losing a category that was based on taste. But for a consumer, they don't care that that's your problem. They're not going to lose sleep over that. However, what you need to do with a creative brief is you need to flip it and do it from the consumer's perspective and find a problem that they care about. Guys acting out and being hungry and hangry, that's something that they care about. So that defined what the problem was. And so they had a really nice insight and solution here, because they realized you kind of turn into this other person and you transform into someone else when you're hungry. And Snickers kind of solves that problem. It's the best chocolate bar for solving that problem. So that's how they got to you, not you, when you're hungry. But you can see there, the biggest point that I think a lot of people get wrong, and this is in media, in creative, everywhere, is that they often put in their creative brief, they think the creative and client brief are the same thing, or they don't know the difference. And with the creative brief, they'll put something like, people aren't aware of, Snickers. People aren't aware that Snickers exists, or they'll do a feature. People aren't aware that we've got the most peanuts in them. And all of those are kind of like, that's talking about the features. It's not talking about like what the actual problem is. So you need to, especially in a creative brief, we don't care that no one has awareness of your product. If you ever see the word awareness in a creative brief, you know that there's a massive error. The person doesn't actually know what they're doing, because no consumer gives a shit whether they know about a product or not. What you need to do is really define it from the consumer's eyes and show it from there. So you're looking for what's the problem in their life and how does this product help solve that problem. And so that's what we're really looking for in a creative brief.
I think a lot of people, they'll take a client brief, and often the client will try to give some insight around their consumer, and they will try to tease out what they think their unique selling points are. So, you're exactly right when you said it could be very easy for somebody getting that brief to just go, oh, we've got to bring to life the fact there's more peanuts, right? Like, that's unique. There's more nuts in this bar than other bars. And I definitely think that's one of the things that we get a lot of in media sales, is you get a lot of briefs that are like, we need to raise awareness of this new insurance product with this demographic. Let's say it's like a female 25 to 39. And what are some insights? Well, she's time poor and she's busy, and it just feels like very surface level, and there's almost kind of like the blurring of like, well, is this a consumer? Is this something that's relevant to the consumer? Or is this just what the actual is important to the marketing team? And I think it probably leads to the next question, which is, when you've got a lot of information that's coming through and you're really trying to kind of brief somebody in to then be able to be the voice of the consumer, like, what information should really be prioritized in a creative brief? What information should be kind of really absolutely critical, and what stuff should be deliberately omitted from the creative brief?
I like to use what I call the get who to buy creative brief. And so that's a prompt with how you write that. So it's the get is, you write get and then you put the target audience in. So get, target audience, who, and the who statement is the consumer problem. The to statement is the consumer goal. And then the buy statement is the single-minded proposition, or the way that we're going to do that, the solution. And so those 4 inputs are what you need in a brief. So again, the target audience, the consumer problem, the consumer goal, and the solution, or the statement, the solution of how we're going to do that. And so that is essentially all you need. And my briefs are often 1 paragraph long. Now, you might have an appendix full of all your supporting documents, but the creatives need something that's really toned down to just that key information. Now, there's other information that you want to keep in there that's on the second page, which will be things like, what's the budget, what's the timing, what are the channels, but the essential elements, and maybe the background, which gives the business problem and the business goal, but the essential elements are just those 4 boxes, which is target audience, consumer problem, consumer goal, and single-minded proposition.
That's a great framework, mate. I know you've actually posted that, I think on LinkedIn, that example from Canada with is it Moving Day that they do over there?
Yes, yeah, for McDonald's Moving Day. So it was very specific. So in Canada, I think it's June 1st, it's much more of a massive day for people moving. And so what McDonald's found was it was actually a big opportunity to get people to use McDonald's delivery, because one, they're moving to a new location, so you want them to be using the app in the new location. You want them to know where the local McDonald's are, but it's also a moment where they're time poor, where they actually do need something delivered to them. So it made a lot of sense. And also when we think about delivery, McDelivery, and moving day, and delivery and moving, it's kind of, there's a lot of themes that work there from McDonald's. Like, it's a very specific niche category. But what they realized was that they were to get their target audience was people who were moving, and the problem was for them, the who statement was all around who were like, they had their hands full moving. They didn't have time for lunch. So that was the goal, to the goal was to use the app, the consumer, to use McDelivery to order food, by showing that it's easier to like do that than have to walk away and actually go and get McDonald's, and show how simple it was and how it could fit into your day. and fit in around you rather than you having to go get food yourself.
I'm going to have to link your LinkedIn in the show notes here, because one of the things I think why this is such a good demonstration of why that framework is really powerful is what the actual end creative turned into. Like that was kind of the raw fuel that went into the creative brief. And I just remember this beautiful visual of the back of a moving truck, and they've packed the furniture from a house in such a way that it's created an optical illusion of like a McDonald's burger, or is it a burger and fries or something? But it was one of those kind of things where you go, wow, like that's a really excellent piece of creative that could have only been built based on a really solid consumer insight and a really nice framework.
Yeah.
To be able to then visually represent that entire consumer problem in one powerful image.
The actual brief was get home movers who have empty stomachs and their hands full moving to use McDelivery for lunch by showing that McDelivery packs into your schedule. And so that was the way that was written, and it was a really tight brief, and it's a great visual work. So definitely look that up. I've also got a YouTube video on that specific case study as well.
You know, Wade Kingsley's been on the podcast before, and we were talking about this idea of characterizing a brief internally for your stakeholders. So there was a thing called the mum test, right? Like nobody's parents really know what we do in media. And so it's like, what do you do again? What's your job? And remember there was this example of, you know, we need to get Debbie and Bill from St Kilda to test drive a Pajero because they need to upgrade their car. And it's like, sometimes actually it's like, that looks nothing like what the client brief or the marketing or media brief would have been. But that's actually a great starting point of just distill the brief down to its simplest, most easy to understand terms. They just use normal kind of colloquial language, like talk the way human beings talk, don't talk with jargon. I think to me, like, that's just kind of such a good jumping off point. I'm not saying it's easy, but I know, Julian, you've put some great examples. I remember there was one, I'm not sure if it was you or somebody else. I'm sure it was you. It was around, you know, getting dads who have stopped working out. You know, this might be poignant for both of us. Dads who've stopped exercising, work professional, and trying to kind of make sure that they can get back into the gym, but understanding that they're time poor and their world's become a lot busier. And I remember there were some really nice ways of actually characterizing that as like cubicle caged men who can't work out when to work out, or dads who lift dumbbells and, you know, kids instead of dumbbells on the weekend. Some of that kind of stuff to me just feels like the stuff that a creative team would just salivate over. And that's sort of the setup for the next question. Like, what are the things that the creatives love to see? Like, how can someone working on a relatively unremarkable client campaign get a bit of an edge in their creative briefs by just putting the right stimulus into the room?
So my first secret to this is it's all about your relationship with the creative director or the creative team. And what that means is you should never be turning up to a creative briefing, showing the creative brief for the first time to the creative team. So what I used to do was I would take my draft creative briefs, and I'd take 3 or 4 different creative briefs that I had written, and I would run the creative director past them and say, hey, here are the 4 directions I'm thinking of going with this brief. What's most interesting to you? What's like resonating with you? And getting them on board early is a way better way of doing it. Because I think a lot of people think that this job of a strategist or writing a creative brief is actually doing it by yourself and then, you know, this grand handoff to the creative team. That often ends in misery. You're just not getting a real vibe or feel from the creative team of how well that's doing. But I would say that's the first thing. So take it to them. I often will take them my research, and especially the insight is the main thing. So a lot of people I feel like the word insight is used a lot in advertising and it's abused.
Yeah, I agree.
Insight to me is a revelatory truth. So it has to reveal something about us that's new, that we've never heard before. And when you hear a truth, you kind of just nod your head. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. 65% of Canadians move on June 1st because it's moving day. That's, okay, and nod your head. Yeah, that sounds right. But a revelatory truth will give you a response that you kind of automatically go, oh, huh. And they say a comedian will go, huh. A scientist will go, aha. and then an artist will say, when they hear an insight. And I think that's, you want some kind of visual response from the creative team or you as or yourself when you hear that piece of information. That's when you know it's a revelation, a revelatory truth. So the one that I love to use is, it was a female razor brand. What they found was that all these female razor brands, they hated hair, but they hated it so much that they would never even show hair in a commercial. So you've got all these commercials of people shaving legs that are already shaved. There's no hair on a leg. You know, if you think back to the 90s or 2000s, when Vita doing those commercials,
they're shaving a bare leg. Yeah, no, you're exactly right.
And it's like we're so offended by hair that, you know, it's such a taboo that we can't even show it in commercials for a hair removal company. They've removed it from the even commercials. And so Billy took that and was saying, this is weird. Like, why we don't even have a choice. They're trying to be like, women have choice in life, but then you won't even give us a choice around hair removal. So they came out as kind of like a bit of a body positivity brand, and were like, if you want to shave your legs, you can. You don't have to. You should have a choice. And in their ads, they showed women with like hair under their arms or on their legs or on their, like, had moustaches, and they were like, that's all fine. It should be a choice. It shouldn't be the media telling you you've got no choice. There's only one way.
That's cool.
But you feel that revelation. To me, it was a revelation when you hear, you know, hair removal companies have even removed hair from their own commercials. And that insight, when you hear that for the first time, you're like, oh my God, that's true. You know, you have that reaction, and that's what you want from an insight.
This was one that I thought was a great example of this, of demonstrating the difference between a data point, maybe an observation, and then a true insight. And it was actually talking to a client. So they've seen cosmetic surgery procedures increase massively, like 11, 12% year on year, right? Which is apparently quite high for that category. And the question of why is that? And you start having some hypotheses, you know, look, it's just because people were going to get procedures done, but they couldn't because of lockdown, because it's elective. And then there was other ones like, no, we're living more digitally. People are seeing these heavily curated social media images and they're wanting to look more like a filtered image. But where we actually landed, which was the aha moment, was I went, a lot of people have just been looking at their own face on video calls for a couple of years. And I know personally, I didn't realize my nostrils were as big as they are and my nose was a bit wonky. I only realized that after sitting on video calls for 2 years.
Yeah.
And that was one of those moments of going, that's an insight that I can hook a campaign idea around. Like, I don't know what, but that gets me excited to go work on an idea a hell of a lot more than, it's just because of lockdown or it's just because of this. It's got to be that eureka moment where everybody in the room kind of goes, yeah, there's something in that.
Yeah, that's like, you need that revelation. I think the second part of it is when we look at like the structure of any strategy, it's like problem, goal, solution. We use the consumer problem comes first, but the insight sits between the problem and the solution. The insight will either reframe the problem and show you, hey, actually, that's not the problem, this is the real problem, or it will provide a surprising new solution. So the problem was, for the Billy hair campaign, it reframed it from, hey, the problem isn't, your hair, the problem actually is the media and all these brands telling you you've got no choice. So they did a reframe of the problem. A surprising new solution was, there's this ad, and again, this is, I have a YouTube video on this, which you can check out, which is for Cheetos. It was for You Can't Touch This, where they had MC Hammer, Cheetos popcorn, and it was these guys in America, again, was the demographic, and they were feeling like hustle culture meant that they had no time to do anything, and they were just fed up with hustle culture of, got to optimize every minute.
Rise and grind every day, 10x your life, all that stuff, yeah.
Yes. And so what the surprising new solution was Cheetos Dust. So it was for Cheetos Dust actually you got it on your hands, and it was actually the perfect alibi to do nothing, because when you've got it on your hands, you can't use your hands, you can't use your computer, you can't use your phone, you can't help your friend move furniture, you can't, spot your mate in the gym. So it provided the perfect alibi to do nothing. So that's an example of a surprising solution. That's a new solution to a problem that a lot of people were probably feeling.
So we've got to a point where we're like really spending a lot of time distilling the brief down into the, get, who, to, buy. We're really spending time trying to mine for and unearth a great insight. We're very much trying to kind of put the right brief together for somebody to get them in the mindset of the consumer. What's some other stimulus that could or should be included in a creative brief just to help kind of spark that process and to inform better, higher quality work?
Two things. I think I'd come back to your point before about like the simplicity. You just want the brief to also be simple, using everyday language is clear. The second part of that is the visual language. So the language that you get to choose, because there's two types of words in the world, which are verbal and visual words. Verbal words don't elicit any picture in your head. So, innovation, transformation, awareness, any of those words. Where if I say words like palm tree, flowers, bottle, they're all words that have got, they've got visuals attached to them. So when I was looking at like the brief for the McDonald's one that we were talking about before, you're saying these people have their hands full moving, rather than just saying who lack access to food options because of other key priorities. That's one way to do it. That'd probably be the official boring corporate way of doing it. But saying they've got empty stomachs and their hands full moving. It gives visuals. Empty stomachs, we've got a visual in our head, or we know how that feels. And then hands full moving. So that's the next step that you want to do with the creative brief, is you want to wordsmith the visual language. So it's not adding more things to it. It's just wordsmithing it and getting that visual language in there. Then with the way that you deliver that in the briefing moment, any way, and what we're trying to do there is we want them to feel as much as possible the words that we're saying. So again, giving them the feeling of having that empty stomach. Those visual words are really going to help. But if you can go further and actually let them feel what it feels like, that's even better. So I don't know. I'm just literally riffing off the top of my head, but could you get them to go and move something? You set the meeting at lunchtime and you get them to move boxes for the start of the meeting, or do a gym exercise routine with them, and then give them the brief and say, you know how hungry you feel because I've like pushed out your lunch and you usually eat at this hour, and now you've done all this physical exercise. That's how these people feel right now, and they've got no time. And so then you're getting them into the shoes of that audience. So any way that you can get them to feel the consumer problem, the better.
I love that, mate. I think that's brilliant, because one of the things that I think is also really interesting, and it's a bit of a tension that exists here, is you go, we don't want to stifle creativity and we want to give a big open scope and let them have freedom to go and explore, that no black hats kind of mindset. And then on the other hand, you kind of go, but there are parameters or guardrails that we maybe do need to set, knowing what we know about the client and their appetite for what it is they want, and maybe what their brand kind of tone and attitude is. It seems it's sort of leading to the question of not so much kind of setting parameters for a brief, but when it comes to kind of giving feedback on something that might have come back that is off brief, or it's not in line with what you maybe thought you would be receiving. A lot of creatives I've worked with over the years, lovely people, can be quite delicate creatures, right? And it's probably where a lot of that creativity comes from. Is there a way, is there an approach, is there a framework or a tool that's sort of best practice when it comes to kind of giving feedback on work that's been put to you that does need to go back and be reshaped or recrafted?
Yeah. So in the strategy finishing school, I talk about giving the creative feedback of the head, heart, and body feedback. And so what that does is it breaks up feedback into 3 sections and 3 creative reviews. So head feedback is the actual brains of the creative idea, which is really the creative brief. Like, do we have the right target audience? Do we have the right problem? Do we have the right insight? So any of those, if you're asking about the target audience, the consumer problem or the consumer goal, and you've got any problem with those, you've got a problem. And if whether it's you or the client, you're challenging the creative brief. And that's really important, because if you see work and you say, oh, that's not the right, that's not the right target audience. Or there was one that I had the other day, which was for a brand which was burkini. So Adidas was in the Middle East, and they had a brief around the burkini, which was this new inclusive swimwear range that they had. And they had identified that 88% of women in the United Arab Emirates didn't have confidence in wearing a burkini. Now, that is a very clear problem. But if someone came along, a new CMO came along, or someone else came along and saw the work, and the work came after that, and said, actually, I don't like this work. You're talking about like how women should be empowered and swimming. It was a great campaign. It actually won the Gold Can for billboards. It was like a liquid billboard where you could swim in the billboard, and it was like trialing the product. But if someone came along and said, hey, I don't like this work. It's not addressing Adidas, which is like the fashionable, stylish brand. That's what we're trying to solve for. We're going to show that you can have a burkini that's stylish. If they said that about the creative idea and that was the problem, you're actually not knocking the creative idea. You're actually knocking the creative brief. And so that's the problem at the head level. At the heart level, that's when we talk about feedback at the heart, which is at the heart of the idea. What is the creative idea? What is the one thing that this creative idea is saying? Now, that feedback is really important and relevant when we're talking through the actual execution for the very first time. Now, the final type of feedback is body feedback, which is once we've had sign off on the idea, and then we're talking about, oh, that's the wrong font, or that's the wrong colors, or is that the right platform? Should we be doing it on Facebook or TikTok? That feedback's really great once the idea has been sold. But if you're getting that feedback in the first creative review, you know that's the wrong time to be getting that feedback. So there's certain times where you give the feedback. So if you're giving head feedback, you want to get that at the very start. You do not want to get that once everything's been signed off and we're just about to, print the billboard and it's about to go out. But when we're about to print the billboard, making sure the font's right and the color's right is really important feedback. So making sure that you know what type of feedback you're about to give and making sure it's at the right time is essential for strategists to understand what type of feedback to give and when.
It's funny, we're going to actually probably jump into the listener question now because it touches on this, and this is a really common problem that I've observed over my time in media.
I can't ask my sales manager that.
Do you have any advice for working with hypersensitive creative directors? I work with a guy that's been in the industry for quite a long time and has a high opinion of himself and his work. He's often quite combative in brainstorms and argumentative when receiving briefs. He also takes feedback terribly, in some cases asking to call the client directly and explain why his work shouldn't be changed. How do I manage this kind of personality while still getting the output I need for my clients?
Unfortunately, that one is not that uncommon. I've come across that particular personality type and that particular issue many times myself. Have you as well, Julian, or is that something maybe exclusive to the world of media?
You're not at all. Everyone has been there. So it's really important to acknowledge that your experience is had at all agencies. Like I've worked at, I would say, world-class, best of the best agencies, BBDO and BBH, and those characters exist there. And I had the exact same problem. So I've got some tips for you. It's more around really understanding their world. And I think this is something that we're just never taught about this, to understand and put ourselves in the shoes of creatives. So with a creative director, the first thing is that they are paid for their creative ideas. Their whole livelihood really relies on creative awards. That's the measure of whether you're still relevant or you're not. And, it's like your stock price. If you're winning creative rewards, your stocks are going to go up. But if you don't, you will go back in your career or you'll be out of a career. They're kind of like athletes, creatives. Their longevity is not very long. If you look around a creative agency, there's not many creative people in the creative department who are not leading that department who are above 45 years old. So you don't have a long career. So you've got to make the work count every time. And so the way they do that is awards. So understanding that is really important as a starting point, because for me as a strategist or an account person, I'm not going to lose my job if I don't win creative awards. For the first 18 months I was in America, I didn't even make one piece of creative work, and that didn't impact me. But for a creative, that would be, the death knell on their career. So understanding the immense pressure they're under with creative work and creative ideas. The other thing is, I think we're told this, which is like ideas can come from anywhere, which they can. Executing on an idea does not come from anywhere. You might have the idea, but then actually being able to implement and execute it is what creatives are really great at. And understanding that that's their expertise is really important. And so things that can often be very threatening to a creative team, or specifically a creative director, are, hey, can we all get in the room and brainstorm some creative ideas for this? That is like, me coming in and saying to an account manager, hey, can we all brainstorm how to project manage this campaign? Or, hey, can we all brainstorm how we're going to respond to this client email? Actually, some account people probably love that, or some strategists would love that. But it's very threatening to their livelihood. They've got creative in their title. So if the work doesn't come back as creative and it's not to that high quality, there's a real impact and concern for their career. And, putting food, and now as parents, we know putting food on the table is so important in our careers. We know they're not going to be long, are at risk. So understanding that is really important. So words like brainstorm don't usually go down too well. Having a great creative brief will. Understanding what type of creative they are will also help you as well. So there's two types or creatives kind of sit on a scale from one end to the other. And so on one end of creatives, you usually find are highly conceptual creatives. So what they want is just the problem statement. Just say, hey, just give me the problem statement. I will figure out what the insight is. I will figure out what the single-minded proposition is, and I'll solve all of that for us. That's one side of it. And then on the other side, there's creatives who want to be told all the pieces, and their skill and their strength is in the execution, just making the best execution possible. So it won't be that highly conceptual piece. They're not going to be giving you a new line like, you're not you when you're hungry for Snickers, but they might be coming up with a really innovative thing like the liquid billboard. Adidas example would be something that's very, specific in there. So understanding where they sit is really important, because that will change what type of creative brief you give. So someone who's highly conceptual, as a creative, you will often give looser briefs to. So briefs that have got really strong consumer problems, but then that's the ones you want to be going, hey, here's 3 different avenues for the insight and single-minded proposition. Whereas for the highly executional ones, you'll want to be going really tight in with a brief. So understanding the type of creative you're dealing with will help you a lot too. Does that make sense?
It really does, mate. I think again, just really crystallizing the world from the perspective of these people, it's so important to have, and empathy is the word for it, right? Like if you've got somebody who genuinely feels like their currency is linked to how many awards that they win for their work, like that's, that's not I certainly don't envy anyone in that level of, under that level of stress straight away. But I think the other thing that's kind of interesting about this to me too is whether there actually are some creators where like that thing about co-creation of a brief is important, like kind of going to them when the brief is still taking shape and kind of working on it with them. Or, you know, I think you even mentioned like writing multiple creative briefs. Like, who said there's a rule that you have to write one brief? Those kind of things to me are really interesting. It's and I dare say those are the types of things that these guys and girls aren't getting met with a lot. You know, they're probably quite frustrated at the lack of quality briefs coming into them. So it absolutely makes sense. I can understand. I mean, my personality type is very much, I'm not a control freak, but there's a level of, there would be a level of territorialism that would come in if other departments started trying to step on my toes around things that are my remit. So yeah, I think it all makes perfect sense. And I think for this person here too, like, sometimes these big bolshy characters actually are, you know, they're just quite intimidating. And they can be quite adversarial. But I think, you know, having an understanding of maybe where that behavior is coming from and adapting your approach accordingly, there's a lot of value in that, mate. That's actually really interesting, very different to what I was expecting the answer to be. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I can understand why they're threatening, and often it's like this insecurity that sits underneath it all of, I might lose my job if I don't make some really great work soon, and here are all the things that are stopping me from making great work. Here are more, you know, we all know this, the more layers of bureaucracy there are, the worse the product gets. And so a lot of the best creatives that I've had to work with, that I've had the opportunity to work with, are so headstrong. They're staunch in their beliefs because they know that their great work gets chipped away. So I was working on PlayStation, and the two creative directors that I worked on there are now the global head of creative at DDB for the whole world, and also the global head for Grey. So these guys were on rocket ships very early on, but they were this person who was very bullish and very intimidating. But now I totally get it, because the end product had to be perfect. And they often said was like, that last 10% is when you've got to hold on and dig in deep. And that's what they did. When they got punched, you know, when it went through all the creative feedback, and the junior brand manager wants their say on it, and they've got different ways, they had to come up to those fights and really hold in and dig in. But there's a reason why the work I did on PlayStation was some of the best work that I did in my career, was because they were so headstrong and they really dug in deep. And I've been with other creative directors who haven't held that strong and let the client lead it a little bit more, or taken on more of the client feedback, and can't be bothered fighting this, I'm going home. And the work wasn't that great.
Yeah.
It's not a surprise, but yeah, I understand the empathy, because there are also then just some that feel threatened that their job might be going away, especially, like things like if you're a traditional creative and you're very good at TV commercials, and now every single brief that comes across your desk is a 6-second YouTube video, and then there's some other person coming in, a strategist or a digital person coming in and saying, hey, this is how 6 seconds work, and you don't do sound anymore, and blah, 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 blah. That's, I can imagine I'd feel very threatened, because that's a totally different world. So understanding that and getting on their side, that, that situation happened with me, and I was able to work with them instead of coming in as like, hey, this is how you do digital. I was able to work with them and get them on side and make them look great. And that was gold for the relationship.
Awesome insight. And I think you're right. Like, to some extent, what's that saying? Like, a donkey is a horse by committee. Like, sometimes too many fingers in the pie and too much collaboration can actually really dilute the work as well. So I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think for this person, I've come across this scenario too. I think maybe, predominantly my experience has been in radio. And I think sometimes, the challenge that you have often is a lot of people who are in that industry stay in it a long time. And so sometimes it's actually very much just around people who have a lot of social currency. They've been exceptional at what they do for many years. Maybe they're a little bit stale in their thinking or in their approach. They haven't done anything to kind of bring in some new stimulus or to keep themselves across the new emerging kind of technologies or innovations out in market. And then you've got, media salespeople who are out there in the coalface every day. They know the channel really well. They know what you need to win. They know how competitive it is. They understand all the innovations that are happening. And sometimes there can just be a level of disconnect between the two worlds kind of colliding. But I do think that, for anyone struggling with this issue, it's like, let's go back and think about what we can control that would decrease the probability of it getting to this point. And a lot of it is actually just writing kick-ass creative briefs and just being really cognizant that it's a skill you've got to keep working on and you've got to constantly refine and develop. And if you do that, you're going to at least minimize the amount of drag or friction that comes as a consequence of that if you do have one of these personalities on the other end of the brief.
The other secret too is if you are in that situation, because I have been in it, showing the opportunity with the new technology and the simple words of, hey, this would be the first time this has ever happened. I can't tell you uttering that 3 words or that one sentence will always prick up ears of creative directors and get them excited, because they want creativity is about doing something new and fresh. So saying, hey, love that idea, here's how we do it, and this would be the very first time doing it this way, I can promise you we'll get creative directors on side. It's a little hack, but it works.
I love that. Well, I think that's a great point to end on, mate. Before I let you go, one of the things that I did want to ask about was how is all going in the world of strategy consulting, comms planning consulting? How's things going with the Planning Dirty newsletter? And I think you may have a special offer for our listeners as well.
So I'm now Strategy Finishing School is what I've been running. So we're over now 2,500 members, which has been going great. And what that is, and I'm doing that full time now. I've stopped consulting and doing this full time because there's just so much opportunity to kind of teach strategy. And the interesting thing is that I've had people, not just from creative agencies, but from media agencies. I've had a number of publishers sign up to the Strategy Finishing School because they want to learn how to write great creative briefs. They want to understand how to be great strategists, how to work with creatives, how to do comms planning. And that's been great. So I've been teaching that. And really, the Strategy Finishing School is for anyone who's kind of fallen into a strategy role, but never had kind of someone teach them the fundamentals and traditional way of doing strategy. I was lucky enough to work at BBH and BBDO in New York and learn from the best there. And that's what I'm distilling in strategy, which is in the Strategy Finishing School, which is so great because it's an opportunity to go beyond, there's no boundaries. It's all on demand. I'm kind of responding to people, giving people feedback on their work. So that's been great. But I would love to, I know we were talking about at the start, I'd love to give anyone who's interested in the Strategy Finishing School a discount to the school. So lifetime membership is usually $19.97, but I'd love to give a 25% discount, which is $500 to any of the members who listen here. And that gives them lifetime access to the Strategy Finishing School. You'll learn all about this. You'll learn about creative briefing, brief writing. You'll learn about creative feedback, how to do comms planning, how to sell in creative work, how to set up strategy departments. There is a lot in there. So if any of your listeners are interested, you can get that discount. I'll let you do the sting for the discount of whatever you want to call that. And we'll set that discount code up. And then if you've got any questions about it, feel free to also email me, Julian@strategyfinishingschool.com.
Love it. I reckon we just do MSM, Media Sales Mastery, as our discount code. And when Julian sends me a link, I'll put it in the show notes, but also connect with me on LinkedIn and I will give you the access to that as well. Thank you, Julian. Very generous, mate. And you're always very generous with your time. You're always very insightful and thoughtful with your answers. It's just so good to connect with you. And like I said, I think you and I are from two very different parts of this kind of world, but it's amazing how much crossover we actually seem to have. So people in media sales, people in publisher side, people in sales management roles, don't underestimate how valuable this stuff is and how instantly transferable it is to our world and our vocation. I myself personally would kind of say that my knowledge of this area is something that I've really made a commitment to getting better at and to learning more of lately. And it's really starting to pay dividends in terms of leading my team and running the business I run. So would very much, endorse it. And hey, Here's the other thing. Just add Julian on LinkedIn and just look at some of the content he posts as a taste of the kind of stuff he does. And I think you'll be sold based on just that alone. So, hey, Julian, I'm going to let you get back to your daughter. Thank you so much, man. I hope at some point soon I can get down to Melbourne and we can catch up in person. But thank you for spending some time with us here today, mate.
Excellent. Talk to you soon.